Good evening, good evening. How are we
Good,
all?
good evening, good afternoon, whatever we're
Yeah,
at. Good
good
evening.
afternoon. So,
Good
first of
evening,
all,
everybody.
apologies for being a minute or so late because Louis and Ross were having a cracking conversation around Scotland. And I've been to Scotland earlier this week, and Louis has been over in Scotland a little while ago talking about whiskey. And as you know, Ross works in the distillery industry. So, some cracking conversation on that. But back to this evening. So, welcome all. Like to introduce Louis from Tropic Marin first of all, and then Jay. I know you haven't met Louis, and Ross, you've just met Louis. So let's do the intro. So we'll go to Louis first, and then Jay.
Well, hey guys, nice to meet you all. I'm Lou Eckes. I'm the CEO of Tropic Marin USA. My wife Leslie and I are the North American office essentially for Tropic Marin. We've been there, North American office, for over 22 years. Wow. I love the company. Got into it just like everybody else does as a hobbyist. For many years, I kept my system was a 3-tank system, and back in those days, it was with a protein skimmer that I built from scratch, and I had a big Rubbermaid tub that I made into a sump with a pile of rocks with water falling over it. That was the algae skimmer, and it was one of those kind of things. I had a bank of LED lights on timers in a closet, and had a sunrise and a sunset. And in those days, it was a 150-gallon Reef, 150-gallon community tank, and a 90-gallon Predator tank. And I had that system for years. The Predator tank had a beautiful big Miniotis grouper in it, one of the prettiest fish you can ever see. And I was very fortunate. A lot of the Miniotis tend to hide all the time. Mine was out all the time, and she was just purple and red and beautiful. And a zebra moray. Those were the two fish in the Predator. Oh, nice. But anyway, I always had used Tropic Marin. I knew the company. And when the opportunity came up, I jumped at it to be in business with them and work with them. And it's been a wonderful association. And if it has to do with Tropic Marin here in North America, it has something to do with Leslie and me. And then I've also, obviously, because it's a German-based company, I'm kind of the English-speaking representative, and so when opportunities like this come up in English-speaking countries, usually gets thrown over to me so that I can do it. Although our whole team in Germany speaks English really well, just easier to throw it to me. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to meet you guys, and I'm excited to see what we maybe can talk about tonight. I'm open to talk about absolutely anything that I might have some experience in. So nice to meet you all.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. I know we met first early this week for a few minutes. So I'll go over to Jay, because I know you haven't met Jay, although seeing from the comments, most of the people in the comments know Jay.
Yeah, evening everybody. Good to see you. Yeah, good to see you all. Lou, it's wonderful to see you as well, and I'm really looking forward to tonight. It's a privilege to have you on the chat, really.
My privilege.
I'm also a massive fan of Tropic Marin, but my experience is only 1 year. So I've been in reefing for the whole of just over 12 months with my little Red Sea Max Nano. Just absolutely loving the hobby. Where you speak about the fish there and the passion you have, I've already got the bug within 12 months of this reefing hobby. It's absolutely brilliant. Ups and downs, but enjoying it. Got a YouTube channel, and just trying to share that journey on YouTube with all the wonderful people in the community. But it's good to see you today as well, and thanks for joining us.
Brilliant. So I know that Ross and Jay, you got something in common, because you both use the Tropic Marin salt, don't you?
Yes, that is my go-to salt. And I think I said this before, actually, and Lou, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but the entire reason that I chose that salt is purely based on the fact that I can mix it up within half an hour and chuck it in the tank. I don't need to wait on it. Now, you maybe tell me that's the wrong thing to do. I don't know, but that's what I do with it.
No, it's perfectly okay, Ross. Really, years ago, in the early days of man-made sea salt, and you guys will notice I never use the term synthetic sea salt, and there's a specific reason I don't like that term. I like man-made sea salt much better. But in the early days of man-made sea salt, the calcium chloride that was used really needed time to equalize its pH. And in those days, when you first mixed up the sea salt, the pH would be very, very high, and you had to aerate it a while to get that pH to equalize. For many years now, that hasn't been the case. And what you're doing with Tropic Marin is really fine. As soon as it's completely dissolved, and it's always good to do a pH check just in case. But as soon as it's completely dissolved and clear, you can go ahead and use it. Now, I will say, Bulk Reef Supply here in the U.S., a big online company, they do a lot of investigative experiments.
A lot of people watch those videos here as well. They're kind of worldwide, I would say now.
Yeah, I think you have to look at it that way. I think people do watch them all over. They did a very interesting study. You know, when we dissolve salt at home for a water change, you have it in a big tub and you have a pump circulating it, and it does look clear in about 20 minutes or so. What they did was they put an eye chart behind small tanks and mixed up a bunch of different salts to see how long it really took for it to dissolve to crystal clear, no cloudiness at all. And when you look at it that way, in a really scientific way, it actually took Tropic Marin was the quickest of all of the salts to dissolve. But by their standards, it took about 8 hours until it was completely 100% clear. That being said, most of the other salts took like 12 and 24 up to 36 hours to get completely clear. But I think that's splitting hairs a little bit. When you look in the bucket and you can see down to the bottom, you see your pump is clear as day. You're good to go. You're ready to use it. Absolutely. So what you're doing is just fine. I won't dispute it one bit.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, what I usually do now, again, hands up, I don't check the pH of it when I make it. That's probably something that I should look at doing. But when I mix the salt up, I literally chuck it in the bucket, put the water in, throw the salt in. So I've got it measured out. I know exactly how much to put in. And the time when I'm cleaning the glass and messing about with the tank, when I turn back around again, it's pretty much what I would say is crystal clear within the space of probably 15, 20 minutes to the most. I then check it to make sure the salinity is right, and if that's right, and it goes, and that's literally it. But to me, and my naked eye, I can't actually see anything in the bucket at all other than crystal clear water. So yeah, they're probably taking it a bit too far on that one, I think. But for me anyway, I think 15, 20 minutes and you've got clear water ready to go in. It looks a lot clearer than what's in the tank anyway.
No, I agree. It's fine to use at that point.
Lou, how long would you mix it for if you were giving guidance? How long would you mix it for?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I usually I recommend exactly what Ross is doing. I say you mix the salt until you see that it's clear. And I think that what we see as clear to the naked eye is really fine. And usually that happens within the space of about 20 to 30 minutes. It's usually what I would call crystal clear. Granted, if you have a large enough volume of it and you put it up to the light and you really look at it carefully, might it not be crystal clear in those circumstances? Yes, but it's fine to put in the tank once you look at it and it looks really clear. Certainly within an hour and often within a half an hour.
So I always mix mine for 24 hours. I now think that might be a little bit too long.
It's actually fine to do that as long as you're not aerating it at the same time.
No.
If you run an air line into your pump that you're mixing it with, as some people do, that can be a mistake because that aeration will often cause a calcium carbonate precipitate. But you can aerate, you can circulate that water, at least with the classic and the Pro Reef versions of the Tropic Marin salt, for very long. I mean, we have zoos and aquariums that mix up large batches of water and hold it for, weeks before they use it. There's no problem at all with that. Granted, with the bioactive salt and the symbiotic salt that have the biopolymers in them, you really do need to use those within about 36 hours of mixing. But the classic and the Pro Reef, you can hold that for weeks and even months if you need to. And once it's completely dissolved, it doesn't even really need to be continually circulated. It's actually, once it's completely dissolved, it's not going to come back out of solution.
That is really good. That is really good. Thank you.
I think that's good to know. Whilst we're just doing a break, I'd just like to introduce you to the fourth member of the team. So that's Steve, who had a few problems logging in. So Steve is up in Manchester. No, that's okay, Steve. Do you want to introduce yourself to Louis?
Yeah, no, my name's Steve Morgan from Mogsy Aquarium. Basically been in a hobby only 3.5 years. I've got a mixed reef. I do use your salt when I need to. Tropic Marin Pro. And I've never had an issue. Just talking about the mixing, I literally mix that salt 15 minutes and it's completely dissolved. Now, obviously, you get a few little particles in the bottom of it, but that's never been an issue for me. I just stick it in a tank. So really good quality salt. I've never had an issue with it whatsoever. But yeah, behind me, obviously, you can see it's a mixed reef, but I haven't done water changes on my tank for over 2 years now. So I just basically dose obviously the essentials, alkalinity, magnesium and stuff. But other than that, it's just basically, it's just like a mature-ish reef now. It's just self-sufficient. It does itself things. As long as I look after it, I feed the fish, do literally 10 minutes maintenance on it a day, and that seems to be good enough. And my philosophy is not to keep my hands in. Keep your hands in messing about, you're going to mess about, and you might have some soap on your hands or anything, detergent or anything, and it's just, for me, keep your hands out and it's good to go, and it's just keep running like that. So yeah,
it's nice to meet you, Steve. And if we have time, let's talk about that water change thing. I just did a big long presentation at the Brooklyn Aquarium Society about water changes, and if you talk to 5 guys about water changes, you're going to get 12 different opinions about it. But if we have a chance, let's talk about that tonight, because I have some thoughts for you about it.
Absolutely, that would be fantastic. Like you said, it's one of those like Marmite questions. If you either like it or you hate it. It's one of those, people will have their own opinion on it. You know what I mean? But it's like I've always said, what works for me might not work for everybody else. You know what I mean? What works for you? So it's just trial and error, I believe. And for me, touch wood, so far so good. It seems to have worked. But I know other people in the reef in game who tried it and it never worked out for them. So and they ended up shutting the tank down. So it was a loss to the community, and it was a loss for them, I suppose, of enjoying this hobby that we all love. You know what I mean? So absolutely, I can't wait. Definitely talk about that for sure.
So I'm going to go into a question, if I may, first of all. So this question's been sitting there for a while, uploads by Tom. And it says, after the BRS investigates on elevated levels, they use a popular elevated parameter salt, but would immediately switch to a Tropic Marin version if available. Any chance of that happening? If not, why? So I don't know if he's referring to Red Sea Pro, because obviously that's got elevated alk in it, and I know a couple of people that I used to use that many moons ago, but then I decided I wanted a lower alk that was around about 7 to 8, so I swapped to I still use the Red Sea Blue. But what's your view on that, Louis, or that question?
Well, I think that it's I'm never going to say it's impossible. I don't like to say anything is impossible. I think it's highly unlikely that Tropic Marin would come out with a salt version that had greatly elevated levels, because when we're talking about elevated levels, usually the things that we're talking about, elevated levels of calcium and alkalinity, maybe magnesium as well. And Tropic Marin, I think that in reef keeping, you can basically break all the companies in the world up into one of 2 categories. One category, one approach is the general the general approach of that category is they look at a reef system as a small enclosed system. And what is said is that because it's a small enclosed system, we have to do things very differently than the way it's done in the ocean, because it's not an ocean, it's a small enclosed system. That's one category. And I think that's the category that the elevated parameter type of approach falls into. The other category, which is the category that Tropic Marin falls into, is the group that says, even though the tank is a small enclosed system, we need to try to do things the way it's done in the ocean. We need to go to school on the way the ocean runs. The guy that designed the ocean knew what he was doing. And corals have been growing like weeds, taking over hundreds of thousands of acres in the ocean for hundreds of thousands of years. We've only screwed this up in the last couple of hundred years at best. Before that, the corals in the ocean did just fine. So we in Tropic Marin like to take this approach of, we don't care that it's a small enclosed system. We're still going to go to school on what happens in the ocean and try to create conditions in your aquarium that are as close to the ocean as possible, because that's where we feel those animals can thrive. And that's probably why I would say that it's probably unlikely that we would create a salt with extremely elevated levels, especially of both calcium and alkalinity at the same time, because chemically that just doesn't work all that great. If you've got higher calcium, the only way you're going to keep that calcium in solution is either with massive amounts of phosphates and magnesium, which really screws up the chemistry, or by lowering the alkalinity. And the same thing, if you want super high alkalinity, you've got to lower that calcium level, or you're going to get a calcium carbonate precipitate. And I think that most of the salts that are out there, and I'm not sure because I'm not in those teams of those companies, but I think that it's a fair statement that most of the salts that are made that have those greatly elevated levels of particularly calcium and alkalinity, at the same time will tell you, as soon as the salt is dissolved, you need to use it right away. And the reason that's the case is because if you hold it, it's going to form a calcium carbonate precipitate. So it's probably unlikely that the Tropic Marin would come out with a greatly elevated level salt like that.
Okay, I think does that answer. Hopefully, that answers the.
Definitely answers the question. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So
I think there's so much good advice.
Uploads by Tom. Are you UK based? Because if you're UK based, I'd like to send. We've got some free gifts here. So we've got a Reef Active, and we'll come on to that a little bit later on, and a sample of Carbo Calcium KH as well. So I can only send that to you if you're in the UK, only because I've got to pay the postage. So we've got a few of these combos to send out this evening. So if you are, can you put it in the comments? And if you are, then if you can message me on Instagram. If you're not, then that's what you could have won, unfortunately. I can't offer that to you, so I do apologise if
they can't collect from your house, then, Paul. Collection.
Well, anyone can collect from my house, but if you're the other end of the UK, you probably won't want to do that. If you're in the US or Germany, something like that, it's probably more expensive than buying that yourself from your LFS. I would suggest. So we've got a few of those to give away this evening. Some of those will be based on the questions we answer, and some will just be random as we go through this evening. So sorry, Jay, you was going to come in now.
I was just going to say it's such an important message by Lou in terms of decision making. I always try to keep it natural. If it's like the sea, then go with it. That's a good decision. If it's in the sea, if it exists in the sea, go with it, because you can't go far wrong with those decisions. Bacteria dosing, natural products, biodiversity, all of those things, you're going to have success if you keep it as close to the sea as possible. it's good to see that the salt is trying to meet that criteria. I don't understand why you would change what works already in terms of elevating parameters and things. But maybe I'm a bit naive to I'm not experienced, but I just think stick with what's in the sea and you can't go far wrong.
I mean, Jay, I'm going to jump in on that. I mean, I think that, you know, there are a number of salts out there that have elevated levels. And I know there are a lot of people that swear by those salts. I think there's all kinds of ways to maintain and manage your reef. And if you kind of build into your water change regime and your dosing regime, the advantages or disadvantages that you would get from a salt with an elevated level, I think you can make that work. I don't want to give the impression that that's just the wrong. There's very few rights and wrongs in this. I mean, I've known people that have kept what has looked like very successful reefs in parameters that seem crazy to me. You know, there's a million different right ways to do this, and I didn't mean to imply that one of those groups of companies was wrong and one of those groups of companies was right. It's just two different approaches, and I think you can have a successful reef by saying this is a small enclosed system, so I need to do things differently. I think that can be successful too. It's just not the road that Tropic Marin goes down.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
I mean, because it comes on to the point, like you're saying, obviously elevated levels and stuff. I ran my tank at 11.25, 11.5 in DKH in alkalinity and stuff, and then now I've dropped and it worked. But that was when I set it up. Obviously, with it being mixed, I had people telling me, you know, higher this, it's better for. But then in reality, the DKH, the alkalinity, and the reef is nowhere near as high as that. But it still worked for me, and that is the reason it worked for me was because I set it off from the get-go, from the beginning. That's the way it was. It wasn't like I was mixing and mixing. Now, obviously, I from researching and learning a little bit more, and from people, you know, explaining the situation, I've slowly lowered mine down, and now it's reading around 8.5, 8.4, 8.5. And I've seen a lot more colour in my tank. Not much growth, but I've seen a lot more colour. So I think it's that balancing act with it. You know what I mean? Do you want faster growth? Because I was getting a lot faster growth when it was higher, but then I'm getting a lot less colour. So now I'm getting a lot more colour and a lot less growth. So I think it's what you want in your tank. You know what I mean? For me, and now I'd rather, because it seems to be, you know, it is growing out. I want more colour in my tank as opposed to growth. So I'm happy now where it's at 8.5, 8.6, and that's the way I'm going to keep it now.
You know, Steve, you bring up an interesting point. If you had always been keeping your reef at 11.5, I'd be the last person in the room to tell you to take it down to 8 or 7 quickly. That being said, I think you got caught a little bit by one of the things that happens a lot, which is when a reef is doing well, we don't know if that well is 9 out of 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 or 5 out of 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. And we run into this as reefers that, you know, we're trying to keep a tank and everything looks pretty good. But is that pretty good or is it great? And how do I know the difference? And I think that's a really tough thing. I would venture to say, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm just going to venture a guess here. I don't think that your color change has anything at all to do with your lower alkalinity, other than the fact that at that lower alkalinity, the chemistry in the tank is working better, which allows your corals to get certain trace elements and certain nutrients that they weren't as easily acquired when the alkalinity is higher. I don't think that it's the alkalinity that's making the color difference. It's the health of the corals and the zooxanthellae, which is what primarily gives the corals their color. I am not personally a fan of keeping reefs at high alkalinities, and I just want people to realize when you're talking about keeping a tank at 11 or 12 DKH, you're literally talking about a tank that is roughly 200% natural seawater level. Natural seawater reef alkalinity is about 6.5 DKH.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that the reef chemistry works at that 6.5, and I don't think it works the same way at 11 or 12. And so your corals may look different, but I don't think that it's a direct result of the alkalinity. I think that it's the reason they look different is because the other chemistry in the tank is working in a way that's very different now because the alkalinity is low.
Okay, so you've got basically a different balance in the
balance.
Yeah.
So it's gone out of balance then, hasn't it? Is that what you're trying to say? So really, would I have needed to add, like, say, more trace elements? And does this come down to because I don't do water changes as well? You know what I mean? I do obviously I do supplement it by adding supplements to the tank, like uronium and vanadium and the things like that, because that's what's in the salt that we mix, and because I don't do water changes, that's the reason why I add it. But do you think that that's what else it could be? The reason is because of maybe I'm not adding enough into the water column as opposed to what I should do.
Well, that's the approach that that other group takes, which says you got to do things differently in the tank because it's not the ocean. Our side of that argument would be now you're just chasing ghosts because now you're raising your alkalinity. Now you have to raise your trace elements. Now you have to raise your magnesium and raise your phosphate level. Now you're chasing a ton of parameters that don't make a lot of sense chemically for the corals. So I think it's easier and more effective to look at the ocean and say, here's a system that works. We know this system works. It's been working for a very long time. What do we need to do to reproduce that in our tank and to maintain that in the tank so that we can get those same kinds of results?
Yeah.
And that's the beauty. There's such a range because the tank now I've run at 7 since day one, only because someone recommended run it at 7, and I've done it at 7. It's gone to 6.5 and not had a problem at all. And you've seen some of the size of the colonies and everything in there. So it's interesting. You can run at 7 and have a successful tank, and you can run at 12. It's just that as you say, the chemistry mix has to be different to balance it. And if there's an imbalance, then it won't be as good as if there is a balance. But you may not know that because you look at it, it looks good. You don't know what you haven't got, I suppose, is what you're saying there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I could just move us on, if that's okay, because this is something we discuss a lot: higher nitrates and phosphates, or lower levels and heavy feeding. And again, it's the other one: a water change, not water change. And we'll come on some others where people say yes and no. I'm sure as we're going on throughout the night. So, Louis, what's your take on this? Because I know the rest of us have discussed this quite heavily at different times in different shows.
Well, so this is a complicated question. It's not as simple as just higher nitrates and phosphates or lower nitrates and phosphates. So I'll try to break it down into its parts. The first thing is a lot of people talk about the ratio of nitrates to phosphates. A lot of people talk about the Redfield ratio. I'm pretty sure that the Redfield ratio was done on surface algae, deep water ocean surface algae, which isn't really coincidental with the same types of ratios that you would get within corals that are in shallow water. So I'm not a big fan of looking at the Redfield ratio, but I think there is kind of a good range of a ratio of your nitrates to phosphates. And we like to think of it of about 10 to 1, somewhere around 10 to 1. If it's 20 to 1, that's okay too. But somewhere in that area, 100 to 1 is not great and 1 to 1 is not great. So somewhere around 10 to 1 seems to be a good place to shoot for. So now we want to talk about, do we want that ratio to be high or low? Well, when it comes to your corals, the nitrates are not all that important because the corals have an incredibly good mechanism for taking nitrates out of the water. So they can get nitrates, the nitrates that they need, the nitrogen compounds out of the water pretty much at no matter what level those nitrogen compounds are. And they don't really need them that much. The unfortunate thing is that they have an awful terrible mechanism for getting the phosphates out of the water column. And when you look at the very low levels that we generally keep phosphates at in our aquariums, that makes it even more difficult for them to get those phosphates. So this is where carbon dosing comes into effect. And hopefully we can kind of transition this conversation into carbon dosing. But for right now, let's talk about the level of phosphates in the basic reef tank. Anything above about 0.1 ppm or higher tends to nourish the good guys and the bad guys. So when you're up over 0.1, when you get into that 0.2, 0.3, 0.5 range of phosphate, you really are fostering the growth of green hair algae and bryopsis and cyanobacteria and dinoflagellates and all these other things that we don't want to see in our tanks. At the same time, if the level gets too low, down in the 0.03 or below range, 0.03 ppm or below, we also start seeing things like cyanobacteria and dinoflagellates that can now very effectively outcompete the good guys because there's not enough phosphates for the good guys to thrive. So in general, the Tropic Marin approach is we like to see your phosphates somewhere between 0.03 ppm and 0.1 ppm. And frankly, my own personal opinion is I'd much rather see you up in the top half of that range rather than in the bottom half of that range. Low nutrients are starving your animals. I can't tell you how many people I have helped come off of what everybody calls, there was a big push a few years ago for ULM tanks, ultra low nutrient.
Well,
and I can't tell you how many people I've helped get off of ultra low nutrient systems from back in the day when everybody was saying, oh, zero nitrates, zero phosphates, the best way to keep a reef tank. It is if you want to starve your corals to death. So the basic answer to the question that was asked was, what's the good levels for these reef tanks? Well, whether you call it higher or very low, I'm not sure, because those terms don't really tell me a whole lot. But numbers wise, I'd like to see your phosphates in the 0.03 ppm to 0.1 ppm range, and your nitrates about 10 or 15 times that. So maybe 1 to 2 ppm of nitrates would be perfect.
Okay.
You know what? I'm so glad you said that, Lou, with the phosphate situation, because that's what I like to aim higher on the phosphates. So my tank now is sitting at 0.12. Now I know that's higher than what you say, but it comes back to that point where when I reduce them or I start to reduce them because they might be getting a bit higher, I do see a big change in the coral. Some of them, like some things will curl up. Some like the euphyllias won't be out of flowy and stuff like that. But then when I hit that sweet spot, or my sweet spot, the one that for my tank, when I hit it, which is around 0.12, that area, 0.08 to 0.12, I find that seems to be the perfect thing for my tank. So that's what I tend to aim for all the time. And as for nitrates, I tend to aim for around about 5 ppm to 7-ish. That's what, because again, it falls into that where you see it with your corals. And I always look that your corals speak to you, and they do. If you look at your coral, you look at your tank. I don't even need to test it sometimes. I look at the coral and go, something not right here. I need to maybe do a test on such and such a thing. and then it'll come back either higher or it'll come back without anything. Do you know what I mean? So for me, it's like, keep looking at the tank, and my corals will they basically speak for me, and then I'm good to go. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm going to say two things about what you said, Steve. First off, 0.12 is great. I mean, I think that's fine. The only problem really that people run into with a higher phosphate level is the growth of algae or bacteria. Yeah. As long as you're not seeing that, then that's fine, and your corals will usually respond very positively to the higher phosphate level. I want to make a comment about what you said in watching your corals. I am a huge proponent of letting your tank speak to you. I think that your tank is going to tell you what it wants. Your tank's going to tell you where it wants to be. At the same time, by the time your corals are showing you there's a problem, it's often a little bit already too late. And if you see that your corals are not happy today, don't think about what you did yesterday. Think about what you did a week or two ago. Because it takes that long to affect the corals. So I have so many people that call me up and say, you know, my corals look retracted today. And I did a water change yesterday. What did I do wrong? What happened? Forget the water change yesterday. What did you do 2 or 3 weeks ago? Because that's why that coral is retracting today.
Excellent point. Absolutely.
So let me just stop you there. Phil, I think you're UK. If you are, then you're just going to send you, I think I'm getting my camera right, the 2 sample pots here. We've got Reef Active and Carbo Calcium KH. If you can Instagram me, and I will send you those 2 pots, courtesy of Louis and the team at Tropic Marin. Right, I just want to move on because there have been a few comments around All for Reef. So I use it in one of the smaller tanks, and that was on the basis of some of the people on here recommending it. So there's a comment there from Steve around having a 100-gallon aquarium, just starting using the All for Reef, the water change. Is this a good recipe for SPS corals, or would I still need to dose?
I don't know. You have to tell me what your parameters are after a few weeks. Let's. I'm going to break this question up into 2 parts. The first is the water change, and then is the All for Reef. Let me be clear about water changes. Unless you've got a nano, well, I'm not going to say nano aquarium, unless you're doing a very high percentage water change. The reason we always mention nanos when we talk about high percentage water changes is because usually somebody with a 100-gallon tank isn't doing a 50% water change. But somebody with a 5-gallon tank might do a 50% water change. So that's why nanos always get mentioned in relation to higher percentage water changes. But it has less to do with the nano part of it than it does to do with the percentage. Unless you're doing very high percentage water changes, the water change does very little to replenish your trace elements, your calcium, your magnesium, and your alkalinity. Okay, very little. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to keep a tank at 420 ppm of calcium, and let's say the tank goes down to 380 ppm of calcium. All right, so it's 380, and you want it to be 420, and you're going to do a 10% water change with natural seawater levels. So you're going to do a 10% water change with water that has 420 parts per million of calcium in it. The difference between your water change water 420 and your aquarium water, which is 380, is 40 parts per million. But you're doing a 10% water change. That means that on the one day you do your water change, you have changed your calcium level from 380 to 384.
Yeah.
That's on the one day you did your water change. The same type of percentage ratio is true for the other elements as well that you're supplementing, and even if you're doing a 20% water change, you went to 388. So you have to understand that water changes do very little to replenish things that are depleted, and water changes on the other side though are very good at getting rid of stuff that you want to get rid of. If you want to get rid of excess nitrates and you do a 20% water change, you just got rid of 20% of your nitrates. That's pretty good. So water changes there are three big aspects of water changes. One of the big aspects is that water changes are very good for exporting stuff and very bad for importing. They're very bad at importing stuff. Okay. Now let's talk about the Reef. Now, the reason I said that, by the way, about water changes is because it felt to me in the question like this person, I forget their name, was feeling like the water changes was Steve was helping his situation in the dosing. And you need to understand the water changes are not helping you with the dosing. Okay. Now, the Reef may indeed do a great job maintaining all of your parameters, but the only way you're going to know that is by testing. And Reef is a single solution that is going to supply the tank with calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, and trace elements. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a fantastic thing, and it is, but it's not a silver bullet. And the reason it's not a silver bullet is because there's lots of different ways of maintaining these parameters and supplementing your aquariums, lots of different ways. And each different way has its advantages and disadvantages. There is no silver bullet. The advantage to Reef is it's a single solution. So you can either manually dose one solution or you can have one dosing pump and Bob's your uncle. You're done. Okay. The disadvantage, though, is that once we put all of those components into a single solution, now the only ability that you have proportionally is to dose the proportion of calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, and trace elements that we put into that solution. And your tank might use a different proportion of calcium to alkalinity. So one possible scenario is you're using Reef to maintain your parameters, and it's maintaining your calcium and your magnesium and your trace elements, but it's not maintaining your alkalinity. But it's doing all the rest of them, but it's a little bit short on alkalinity. In that case, you might want to supplement your Reef addition with a little of the balling part B, which is the alkalinity part of the balling. That way you can supplement and get a little extra alkalinity more than what's in the Reef. Maybe the Reef is maintaining your alkalinity and your magnesium and your trace elements, but not your calcium. In that case, you would supplement once in a while with a little extra balling part A. So in theory, the Reef should maintain all of the parameters, but in practice, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes one of those parameters might need a little help because the proportion of those things that you're adding is the proportion that is in the Reef, and you have no way of adjusting that. I hope that answered the question.
Steve, does that answer the question? It certainly does from my perspective.
I would say so, yeah.
Okay, so we'll just move on to other questions. What's the best way to bring FOS down? We have this question quite a bit.
Well, now we can talk about carbon dosing. There's a lot of different ways to bring phosphate down. You could run GFO, granulated ferric oxide hydroxide. But in my opinion, the disadvantage of running GFO to lower your phosphate level is that phosphate is a crucially important nutrient for your corals, and you're throwing it out. It's all going into your GFO, and you're getting rid of your GFO. You're just tossing it out. In my opinion, the best way to lower your phosphate and nitrate levels, and I put those two together because they often go together, even though this question is just about phosphate, is with carbon dosing first. And then if you need additional help, there's additional things to do, like GFO, like you can lower your feeding a little bit, feed the tank a little bit less so it doesn't produce as much nitrates and phosphates. There's a number of different ways of doing it. But in my opinion, carbon dosing should come first. Now, if it's okay, Paul, I'd like to do a little bit of a deeper dive into carbon dosing. Because I think it's one of the vastly misunderstood things in our hobby. Carbon dosing, most everybody looks at carbon dosing as a way of lowering their nutrient level. And that certainly is true. But it's not, in my opinion, the most important thing carbon dosing does. Now, there's a reason we look at it as a nutrient export method. Number one, because it actually does that. And because number two, the history of carbon dosing is in nutrient export. Big commercial aquaculture facilities realized that if they had 500,000 sun bass in a big tank and they were trying to bring them to market, grow them and bring them to market quickly, so they're feeding them very heavily, creating a lot of phosphates and nitrate waste in these big aquaculture tanks, they found out that if they fed that tank carbon compounds, the bacteria would get rid of some of that phosphate and nitrate. And so the history of carbon dosing is in big aquaculture and nutrient export. However, once we started using it in reef tanks, we found out that it does a much more important thing. And I've got a little graphic here that I'm going to bring up. I'm going to do a screen capture if I can figure out how to do that.
We're waiting for that. I mean, I'm a great lover of carbon dosing, as some of you know, because I've been running NOPOX, which is obviously different to the one that Tropic Marin does, for the last 6 years. And so I've been using it as the main export, and I really like it. But I know that it has got mixed reviews, as you say, Louis, on that. Steve, have you used carbon dosing before?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Is that better now, guys?
Yeah, it's a lot better.
Yeah.
I can hear you better, and there's no feedback on the line.
Oh, fantastic. I'm completely useless when it comes to computers, for sure. What did you say?
I was saying, have you used carbon dosing before? I know that I don't think Jay has, and I don't think Ross has, but I think, have you used NOPOX or anything like that in the past, or carbon dosing?
Yeah, I did. I used the NOPOX, and then I used the Aquaforest Nitrophos. I used that only short term, but I've still got a whole 1 litre tub in there. I tend to, if anything, excuse me, I tend to try and find what the cause is, like what's rising it. I don't really like putting a lot of, it's like when it comes to carbon, like running carbon, and Rowaphos, I only run that when I need to, in my tank. I don't keep it. So I know loads of people keep it running continuously in the tanks. I only put my reactor on when I need to, like if the phosphates are rising too much, or I need to, or like say the water quality doesn't look right, then I'll put some carbon in, or, if I've done some fragging with so amphids and, things might leach into it, then I'll put carbon in. But other than that, I don't really tend to use much of that stuff, if the truth be told. No, so, okay. But I have used it in the past. I've used carbon dosing in the past.
Okay, so I'm just going to hand over to Louis, because I know he's got a few slides and just walk us through.
All right, so when we're talking about carbon dosing, we're talking about a very different thing than activated carbon. There certainly is this NOPOX here, which is what
I use. Yeah,
what Paul said he was using. There's a lot of people will do vodka dosing or vinegar dosing. There's sugar dosing. And then there's, of course, our products. There's a number of different ways to do this. You can use pellets. But what's really important is to figure out and to understand what is really happening. And let me explain this. So here's my little schematic of a coral polyp. And the coral polyp, as I said before, has a very, very effective mechanism for taking nitrates out of the water column. And unfortunately, it's got a really ineffective mechanism for getting the phosphates out of the water column. And it really needs those phosphates way more than it needs the nitrates. So that's super unfortunate. Now, there's lots of beneficial good bacteria in all reef tanks. And the cool thing about that, some of that beneficial good bacteria, is that it's exactly the opposite of the corals. It has an excellent mechanism for taking phosphates out of the water column, and frankly, does not have a very good mechanism for getting phosphates out of, it's got a very good mechanism for getting phosphates out of the water column, and not such a great mechanism for getting nitrates out of the water column. So exactly opposite of the coral polyps. Now, here's our beneficial bacteria. And, and as he runs around the tank, he's going to eat up phosphates. He's going to get phosphates out of the water column, and he's going to eat them. They're going to end up inside of him. And the result of that is that you see the phosphate level in the water column go down. This is where some of that nutrient decrease is happening, is that the phosphates end up inside of those bacteria rather than out here in the water column. Now, here's our coral polyp again. And our coral polyp is a filter feeder. So as this bacteria floats around the tank, he's going to eat lots of it, and it's going to end up inside of him. And as it ends up inside of him, so does the phosphate. Now, you'll notice I leave one little guy out here. And the reason I do that is because when we carbon dose, not all of the bacteria gets eaten. Some of the bacteria goes out through the protein skimmer or the mat that you have. If you've got one of those roller mats, that's all going to take some of this bacteria with that phosphate out of the system. But most of it is going to end up inside the coral polyp, because the coral polyp is a filter feeder and he eats that bacteria. Now, the cool thing about this is that because he eats the phosphate, it still keeps the phosphate down in the water column because it's not going back out into the water. And now that this coral polyp has all of this phosphate, he's going to be super happy. So he's going to get engorged. He's going to multiply. And as he multiplies, remember, we said early on, although they've got a lousy mechanism for taking phosphate out of the water, they have a very effective mechanism for getting nitrate out of the water. So as they multiply and get engorged and feed more, they're going to take now more nitrate out of the water column. And that's why you see both of these nutrients now go down from your carbon dosing. So let me pull my, stop my screen sharing here. And get back to you if I can. Am I back now? Okay, good. So while we mostly look at carbon dosing as a nutrient export mechanism, it actually does something much more crucial for us, which is it gives our coral polyps a very effective mechanism for acquiring these essential phosphates that they need in our aquarium that has such a low phosphate level. And my guess, Steve, is this. I'm going to come back to your 1.2 phosphate level for a second. I totally understand why your corals are not happy when your phosphate level drops too much below that. My guess is that if you were doing some carbon dosing, you could run, if you wanted to, a lower phosphate level and still keeps the corals happy because they would be getting the phosphates in another way. Right now, they need that little bit of elevated level to be able to get those phosphates in a better way. So that's what allows us to run under that 0.1 and still get those corals to be happy.
That's an interesting one, because I'm using NOPOX because of taking phos and nitrate out. I haven't really thought about using it as a trigger for help corals to consume it, that reduces it as well. So it's feeding them, it's making them grow, making them better, making them happier. I just taken it as because, and there's another comment here. I always thought you use carbon dosing. You have a big skimmer. You run the skimmer wet because that helps to draw it out. So I haven't really thought about it that it accelerates or helps the corals to consume that phosphate as well.
I have one more point I want to make about carbon dosing.
Yeah.
Because and Paul, you and I touched on this the other day a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I'd love to answer this Lucid Reef question.
Yeah.
Carbon dosing in a lot of communities has a bad rap, and it has a bad rap for a very good reason. And here's why. A lot of people, when the whole carbon dosing craze started dosing with vodka, vinegar, or sugar. And there's good bacteria and algae in the tank and bad bacteria and algae in the tank. And there's an interesting distinction between the good bacteria and the bad bacteria. The distinction is that the bad bacteria, the bad guys, because we're talking about bacteria and algae films and all of that stuff, bacterial films, algae films. The bad guys want a single, what's called a monomer. They want a single carbon molecule, okay? They don't have a good mechanism for taking a long chain of carbon molecules, polymers, and breaking them down into the individual components. I'm not saying that they can't do it. They just don't have a good, effective way to do it, all right? The good guys have a very effective way, very easily break down those long chains into the small molecules that they need. What happens with vinegar and vodka and sugar dosing is that you're dosing very short polymers, very short carbon compounds that feed everybody, feed the good guys and the bad guys. When you focus your carbon dosing into compounds that are longer chains, and this is what Tropic Marin does with all of their carbon dosing products, we use longer chain polymers, and for the most part, that keeps the nutrition away from the bad guys because they can't break those down, and funnels that nutrition, focuses it on the good guys that have the ability to break it down. And the reason vodka and vinegar got such a bad rap is because a lot of people, well, we're human beings. So if 5 is good, 10 is better, right? So if they started dosing, more vodka is good for me. Why not for my tank? So what they would do is they started dosing their tanks with vodka and vinegar, and they would dose maybe a little bit too much and start growing all kinds of horrible stuff in their tank. And so carbon dosing kind of got this profile of, oh, if you overdose your tank or you dose too much or you're not careful, you're going to grow a bunch of stuff that you don't want to grow. That's terrible. In some ways, that's true if you dose the wrong kind of compounds. If you dose the right kind of compounds, you're targeting the good guys, and the good guys are very effective at helping your corals get those phosphates that they need. So that I wanted to just stick that in there. To Lucid Reef here, I didn't say anywhere that you can't carbon dose if you don't have a skimmer. You actually can still carbon dose without a skimmer. I know a lot of people that do. I would say that I would be a little bit more careful about my dosage to make sure I don't overly dose the tank. But I know a lot of people that carbon dose their tanks that don't run skimmers, and it works just fine. If your tank is super dirty and you're really dosing the tank heavily, you're really carbon dosing the tank heavily, maybe that would make a difference. But in most cases, even if, okay, you don't have a skimmer, but do you have a filter sock that runs? Do you have a roller reef reefing that runs?
Filter, yeah.
Yeah. Any of those things will effectively remove that excess nutrient bacteria nutrient combination. And if you don't have a filter sock and you don't have a roller and you're not running any of that kind of thing, you can still get away with it as long as your nutrient level is not, you're not trying to get down a hugely high nutrient level. But just because you don't have a skimmer, that doesn't preclude you carbon dosing at all.
That's
so
really
I take it, just to jump on that one, Luke, in regards to that, so I've got a tiny little all-in-one tank here. It's not a 15-gallon. My phosphate's quite high, and I've struggled to get that down. So I've been trying raw phos in there, and I was under the same impression as Jake Lucid Reef that I couldn't do carbon dosing because I don't have a skimmer. I don't, it's a very basic tank. I take it if I was to do carbon dosing, it would just be a case of changing the filter floss every day rather than every couple of days or so on. Is that basically all we'd have to do? Yeah,
every 2-3 days, maybe. I mean,
that's what I do just now anyway. So
it depends on, it depends on your particular system. I mean, at the end of the day, every single comment that I make comes with the caveat of it depends on your system. I mean, that goes without saying. But in general, you could probably carbon dose, change your filter media, your whatever your mechanical filtration is.
Just floss,
your floss a little bit more often. I would start out by changing it every day because in the beginning, it's probably going to take a little bit more out than later on. But you can absolutely still carbon dose that tank, 100%.
Okay, I didn't know that, so that's good. Thanks very much.
Yeah, and when you're running your GFO, like you're running RoaPhos's GFO, I have nothing against RoaPhos, don't get me wrong, but I'm not a huge fan of GFO if you don't need it, because what you're doing is that you're throwing away all this valuable nutrition for your corals.
Mm-hmm. Well, the issue that I had, the reason I went down that route is because I was plagued with really, really bad green hair algae. I mean, off the scale, my tank was covered in it. Yeah. And my phosphates, when I managed to get rid of the green hair algae, my phosphates, even just now, I struggle to get them down below. So I think the lowest they've been recently was 0.15. They're usually sitting about 0.2. Yeah. And I'm just struggling to get them down past that. And I mean, I've cut back the feeding massive amounts, but I think it's just because it's such a small tank, I'm having a difficulty with it, to be honest with you.
Ross, my suggestion to you would be to start with the Reef Active, because the Reef Active is a very, very, I don't want to say low risk, because then it sounds like the other ones have risk, and they really don't. Yeah. But it's a product that gives you a lot of benefit without any downside to it, really. And you may find that the Reef Active alone would help your phosphate levels start to come down. And if you see that the Reef Active gets your phosphate level decreasing a little bit, it's really an indication that a little more aggressive carbon dosing might get rid of your whole problem easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would that work if, say, your phosphate is high, but your nitrate is where you need it? Because there's a few comments here around my nitrates are fine, my phosphates are too high. I know, Ross, we've discussed it on here before around you're giving your nitrates because you've got your bioballs in there. So that kind of takes care of that, but it's your phosphate.
Yeah. My nitrates are where I want them to be. My nitrates are sitting at 10, and I'm really happy with that. But my phosphate's sitting at 0.2. So it's that balance, and I have to try to get the phosphate down while keeping my nitrate where it is, because that's where I want my nitrate to be.
Well, keep in mind that your nitrate level is not going to affect your corals all that much. And if you're running a 10-to-1 ratio, you could literally get your nitrates down to 1 if your phosphate level was 0.1, and you'd be golden. So at a phosphate level of 10, you've got quite a bit of margin to allow your phosphates, to let your nitrates come down a little bit. The question, though, I think is a valid one. My nitrates are low and my phosphates are high, what do I do? Or my phosphates are low and my nitrates are high, what do I do? Those are valid questions. And that's a little bit more difficult situation than when both are low or both are high. And I see food as a major resource when it comes to these situations. And I'll explain why. If you overfeed your tank a little bit, you're going to increase the nitrate level, because the whole food cycle ends at nitrates. Like you have no choice.
Yeah.
So Your fish will eat pretty much as you give them. And if you give them more, they're going to create more waste, which is going to end up as nitrate. So if you need to raise your nitrate level, feed your tank a little bit more. That's the answer to that. If you need to raise your phosphate level, I have a very unconventional way that I like to do it. And I'm actually even a little hesitant to say this on a video, but I'm gonna,
it's there for eternity, isn't it?
but I'm gonna say it.
Yeah.
In general, you will find that extremely inexpensive fish foods may use a lot of phosphates as preservatives. And so if you need to raise your phosphate level, go out and buy the most inexpensive fish food you can find and feed some of that to your fish for a week or two and see if your phosphate level increases. There are certain phosphate products out on the market where you can actually add phosphate to the tank. But the reason I like to go this route is because, to me, and this is just my personal preference, I feel like it's a more natural way to do it rather than dumping phosphate directly into the tank. We're allowing the natural cycles in the tank to get that phosphate into the water. So I've done this with a lot of different people, and it works. You just have to go find those really inexpensive foods and feed that along with the good stuff to your fish for a few weeks, and you'll see that phosphate level come up.
Can I just ask a question? Why is it, do you think, that the more people, I mean, I know a lot of reefers, fellow reefers and my LFS and stuff like that, and a lot of people, if I ask 10 people, in fact, no, I'll go so far to say 50 people, if I ask 50 reefers, they would, I reckon 45 of them would say, I have more problems with my phosphates as opposed to my nitrates. Now, what is the reason? Is there a reason that we're all doing something wrong, or is it, because I've had it myself, because my nitrates will stay levelish. They might fluctuate a little bit, but not by that much. Whereas with phosphates, 1 minute they'll be like perfect, and then next I'll be like test it, it'll be like 0.022, and I'll be like, what? Where has this come from all of a sudden for no reason? And yet I still feed the same food as I always have done. You know what I mean? I might have bought a different flake or a different pellet. Maybe that might be the case. But I'd love to know what the reason is behind it, why more people struggle with phosphates as opposed to nitrates.
Yeah, I don't have a direct answer for you, but I have two thoughts about your comment.
Yeah.
One is that we notice the phosphate level change more because our corals are more sensitive to it. We don't notice, you don't necessarily notice if your nitrates go from 10 to 15. Who cares? It's not going to make any difference. But if your phosphates go from 0.05 to 0.02, now all of a sudden your corals are all retracted. So I think part of it is that we notice the phosphate change more. And you also have to understand that when you're talking about nitrates, you're talking about the difference of 10 parts per million to 20 parts per million in there somewhere. And when you're talking about phosphates, now you're talking about 0.1 part per million or 0.03 part per million. So if you tried to keep your nitrates within 0.05 part per million of 10, you'd have a problem. The numbers are just so much smaller that we can go out of whack so much easier.
Never thought of that, actually.
Right, I'm just going to give Louis a bit of a break for a couple of minutes, and they've got this question here, so I'm just going to go around the table, and I'll come to Louis in a minute, around preference of all-in-one or sump. So I know, Steve, you recently had a frag tank that was an all-in-one, and you got a sump. What was the easiest to run? Your one behind you, or the smaller tank?
The sump, the sump by far for me. I mean, the all-in-ones are great. Don't get me wrong, but for me, I've got big, huge shovel hands, and getting my hands in between the backs and stuff like that, it's just, for me, plus you've got more water volume as well in a sump. You've got more space to fit equipment. It's just, for me, it's just night and day. I mean, I wouldn't have any other tank without a sump. I mean, a large tank, so it'd have to be the sump for me. So, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. The same here. My first tank was an all-in-one. And it was okay when you've only got a small number of fish in there, and you've got easier corals to look after because you could be a little more lax, and also to the point in there you can put a skimmer in there, and I used a Tunzi one. It was really good, but nowhere near as good as the skimmer I had on here. And as you say, it's easier to get your hands in and stuff like that. I know, obviously, Ross, you're jumping into the world of a sumped tank fairly soon. What's your expectations on that compared to the other tank you've got?
So I think I'll hit this from another angle. So the thing for me is the little all-in-one tank that I've got here is almost effortless when it comes to maintenance, water changes and so on. You can do everything in half an hour. That's it, done. You're not messing about with big volumes of water doing changes. I do a 10-litre water change in this tank every week, which is a 20% water change. I don't have to dose, so that from that side of things, the all-in-one tanks are great. But from the other side of things, if something goes wrong, it goes wrong quick, and it usually gets out of hand quite quick. So, my upgrade's going to be a bigger tank, 4 times the water volume. It's going to have a sump and everything there. It's all coming, I think, next month. But that's going to be quite a big change for me, I think, because the maintenance side of things will be slightly more, but I'm hopeful that I'm going to have that little bit of buffer room between things changing rapidly in this little tank to things changing maybe in a day in the other tank. So, you're getting a bit more room to actually notice things changing first compared to, like you said earlier, Lou, by the time something's changed in that tank, it's too late. It's out the way, it's done. So, I think I'm looking forward to having the tank with the sump. I think that's going to be a big thing, but at the same time, it is going to be slightly more work on the maintenance side of things. So it depends what way you look at that question, I think, Paul.
Okay. Yeah. And Jay, what's your view? Because I know you got an all-in-one, but I know we've talked many times about you getting your upgrade. What's your view of perception of maybe the holy grail, not the one in your tank, of a sumped tank compared to the all-in-one?
I think Tropic Marin Pro Salt in the Red Sea Max Nano works really well, to be honest. But there's a plug, Lou. There's a plug. Okay. In all seriousness, I think I came at it a year ago as a beginner. I didn't know enough about kind of skimmers. I didn't know enough about filter rollers. Hey,
they're all after a plug and a free
always has to go one better with a plug. I'm going out the garage now to get mine. So as a beginner a year ago, I didn't know enough about skimmers or filter rollers or anything really. So I thought, right, let's just buy a tank where it's kind of set up for you, and then you can just plug it in and play. And I wasn't even sure that I was going to enjoy the hobby or how good I would be at the hobby or whatever. So I think the all-in-one, everything in the back is really great if you're just starting out and you're not sure if it's the right hobby for you. However, saying that, I cleaned my sump for the first time last week. And because I've cleaned my sump, I've disrupted a lot of the sponges in there and some of the nitrates in there. And like Ross said, as soon as you start to mess with such a small space, it can go west very quickly. And I've had a bit of issue with my nitrates at the moment. So if you know you're going to be in the hobby for long term and you've got the money, definitely you've got to have a sump system. But there is a place for these little nanos because they are really easy to run, and for a beginner, they're a perfect start to the hobby, really.
Yeah, and we talked about cost. Talk about cost because I know, Ross, we've been exchanging messages, and it's got to buy a return pump, and then you got to get their skimmer, and then look at the reactors, and then the lights, and then that's without making more water and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, you go from that all-in-one, and certainly you can get some of all the kits there. You quite often end up replacing it, don't you? And all of a sudden, you start thinking, is it £200-300 for a return pump and stuff like that? And it becomes bingo numbers compared to what you do. And we were talking about £1,000 for a tank, and then
Yeah.
maybe $2,000 for the rest of the kit, and then you're talking what, $3,000 or $4,000 for the calls, and it goes up as you start getting bigger, doesn't it? So you've got to put that on the other side. Steve, I'll bring you in because I know you was going to talk, then I'll come to Louis to get his view after.
No, I was just going to echo exactly what Jay said. I think for the person who's just starting out in the hobby, I know we all talk about water volume, the bigger that you can afford, the best, it's better for you because you'll have less chances of something happening in your tank. Like what Ross has just said, things can happen really, really quick. But I think like we've all just hit on the point exactly what you just said. The cost of it's the cost of getting a tank. Yeah, all the extra. It's not about buying the tank. It's nothing to do about. It's everything that goes in a surplus tank. Yeah. Everything that, you know what I mean. And this is where, I mean, if I would have known how much that would have cost me, I could have bought another family car by the time that for the price of that. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Or fleet.
Or I could have bought my dream motorbike. You know what I mean? For that tank. Yeah, that's sitting in my house. So if I'd have known in hindsight how much it would have cost, would I have done it? I probably would say, yeah, I probably would have done it. But I'd have probably maybe like cut down on maybe a few things and this, that, and that. But for me, I think some all-in-one tanks for the beginner who's just starting out, doesn't know whether they're going to be in it forever, or whether they're going to be able to succeed in it. Yeah, I think you can't go wrong with an all-in-one. But if you can afford it and you've got that determination and that willpower to say, you know what, I am going to succeed in this hobby, then I would go out and I would just get a sump one and then be done with it. That way you don't need to upgrade. You won't really need to upgrade. You know what I mean? If you get a 300 or a 400 litre tank, you won't really need to upgrade, really. You should be good to go. That's my opinion anyway, especially on them.
Absolutely. And that's why I went in all-in-one, because I weren't too sure if I was going to stay in the hobby or not. It was a good way into the hobby, and I've just gone from there. Right, so Louis, what's your view after hearing everyone and the comments are very, very similar as well?
I agree with everybody. One thing that I think is important to realize is that the all-in-ones that are made today are way better than the all-in-ones that were made 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And so I think the success rate with all-in-ones for newer people is higher today than it used to be. And that's good. And I think it is a good way to get into it. However, I also think that it can be more challenging with an all-in-one, and it's almost like you've got a better chance of success if you've got a sump system from the beginning. But the thing that and then progress to an all-in-one, I could have never kept. I in the early days, I never could keep an all-in-one and have it do what I wanted it to do. Now I can, because I know so much more now, and all-in-ones are in some ways are very unforgiving. It's a slight little move one way or the other, and boom, you have a problem. Where in a sump system, you've got a little bit more margin for error. That being said, there's one really important factor that I think is more important than whether you're getting an all-in-one or you're getting a big system with a sump. And that is that I think all too often people look at the initial cost of the system. And this is something that Steve just said. People look at the initial cost of the system as kind of that's what they're in for. And what I always tell people is, because Tropic Marin is an upper end brand, and so we do have customers that complain to us about price. And what I usually say to them is, because I have guys come to me at trade shows and they walk up to me and they say, "I'd love to use your salt, but it's too expensive." And I say, "Okay, tell me a little bit about your system." "I have a 375-gallon Reef with a 200-gallon sump. I've got Walt Disney frags in one half, and I've got and the guy proceeds to describe to me a $45,000 Reef system. And what I try to get people like that to realize is, when you're starting a Reef, it's like you're buying a Ferrari, you're buying a Maserati. You're not going to go to Walmart to get your oil at that point. You know,
No.
you're making a contract with these animals to keep them healthy and maintain them. So if you're not going to have the funds to do this on an ongoing basis, maybe you shouldn't have a 375-gallon reef. Maybe you should have a 90-gallon reef. Maybe you should have a 25, you know, but size the system in a way that allows you to maintain the system properly. If you have concerns about $5 extra for a bucket of salt to do your water changes, you're in the wrong system. You just are, you know. If you're not looking at it like I could buy one less frag this year to pay for the difference in my supplies for the whole year if I go with a better quality, then you're not looking at it properly. So I try to get people to, whether it's a sump system or an all-in-one or whatever, try to think about the ongoing cost, because it goes way past just what do you got to outlay today to get set up.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true, that. You know what, we've talked about this in the past on previous shows, you know, about, like, say, battery backups from certain companies and stuff like that, yeah. And we've said we have all of these, we have thousands of pounds, thousands of dollars of coral in our tanks and stuff like that. And a lot of us in the UK, we don't run, I mean, obviously in America, you're prone to, you know, tornadoes and stuff like that. So obviously, we're fortunate that we don't really get many of them over here. But we still have electric cutouts. We still have things, and for me, we don't even have a lot of the reefers over here. We don't have battery backups. We don't tend to buy. And then we talk. You know. Well, you do, but some of them we talk about them. We say, you know what, for £150. Well, I'm not paying £150 for a battery. But hold on a minute, you've just paid £500 for a rainbow chalice and this, you know. So for me, it comes down exactly like you say. It's exactly like you said, Lou. You know, if you should be in it. If you're in it, you're in it for the long term, and you need to look to the future, as opposed to, like, saying, well, you know what, penny pinching and saying, oh, I can't afford to do this because of X, Y, and Z. And I totally agree with you. You know, when it comes to that, for sure.
Steve.
Yeah,
we wouldn't know if you had a power cut at your house. They've got like a fire burning in the background there.
Yeah, it's the Mrs. Candle.
There's about 19 candles lit. You wouldn't even know there was a power cut. Is that keeping your tank warm?
No, it
looks like the altar at the church.
It's keeping the house lit because I can't afford the electric.
You've not had a power cut, Steve. I tell you, look at that.
It's keeping the house lit, mate. The electric's too expensive now. Electric's going up nowadays. No.
And the gas, is that to compensate having the gas on? Is it?
I cook on top of it.
I know.
Yeah, I'll cook on it.
Just put the titanium heat bar on, Steve. You don't need that many candles in there.
Oh dear. Right, so AB Reef. I don't know if you're UK based. If you are, can you message me on Instagram? Oh, it's Adam. Right, Adam.
It's Adam,
if you can see that.
Yeah,
you just won a pot of Reef Active and carbon calcium KH, courtesy of Tropic Marin. So if you want to message me on Instagram, I'll get your address and I'll ping those out to you. So that's 3 of those gone tonight. Now, there was a question further down. The question was, Louis, if there was one product from Tropic Marin that you could recommend, what would it be? It's a bit, and I'll come on to corals and fish in a minute. We usually have a question on that as well. So what would it be? If I can find the comment while you're answering.
I know I'd go for it if I was Lou anyway, for sure.
Well,
I'm going to listen to see what you say.
You know, I'm going to give you my answer, but it's going to, I think the reason for it's going to surprise you.
Okay.
So, obviously, I would say the salt. And the reason I would say the salt is because people don't realize these animals, the corals, they exist. They live their lives through osmosis and diffusion. They have a membrane their external membrane that is constantly exchanging fluids and compounds with their environment. And it makes no sense to me, none whatsoever. And I know so many hobbyists that do this. It makes no sense to me. They'll spend, $350 on a little frag that they put in their tank, and then they'll skimp on literally the air that coral is going to breathe for the rest of 24/7 for the rest of its life. To me, the water quality, the cleanliness of the water that's in that tank is always going to be the number one key thing to the health of the system. And what people kind of misunderstand, I see the comment all the time on the internet, because I follow, lots of boards and stuff. And I always see people saying, the salt doesn't matter because it's got all the same stuff in it. Or the cheap salts have the same stuff in it that the expensive salts have. They're all missing the point. When you're paying more for a premium salt product, you're not paying for what's in that box. You're paying more for what's not in the box. What I mean by that is that Tropic Marin uses extremely high-grade raw materials for all of its products, pharmaceutical grade. Now, that's become like a buzzword, like people talk about it all the time. They don't really understand what it means. But let me explain what it means. What it means, and in fact, I'm going to tell you why Tropic Marin uses pharmaceutical grade. Way back in the day, back in the 50s and 60s, when Dr. Hans Biener was first starting this company, he made human pharmaceuticals. He made a treatment for psoriasis that was called Sorisol. And our sister company in Germany mixed the salt for this for this Sorisol. It was because people for thousands of years would go to the Dead Sea and take a bath in the Dead Sea and then lay out in the UV rays of the sun as a treatment for severe psoriasis. And Dr. Hans Biener back in those days said, well, if the Red Sea can be like that, I'm a chemist, I can reproduce it in the lab. And so he reproduced the formula of the Dead Sea in the lab, and it was a bath in doctors' offices, and then people could lay in a UV tanning bed, and it would temporarily get rid of the symptoms of severe psoriasis. And so our history is in human pharmaceuticals. Tropic Marin history is in human pharmaceuticals. That's why we still use pharmaceutical grade raw materials to this day. That's why our quality control procedures and protocols are all just like human pharmaceutical quality control protocols, because that's what we used to do. But why is that important? Well, it's important because the grades of raw materials that we use are certified to be a certain level of pure enough that you could make a human pharmaceutical from it. Now, let me explain to you. When a company like Tropic Marin goes to buy, say, sodium chloride or calcium chloride or anything, any magnesium sulfate, any material, they go to raw materials company and they say, we want to buy sodium chloride. What do you have? And they give you a list of different grades of raw materials. Now, at the bottom of that list is a very cheap sodium chloride called ungraded sodium chloride. That means they mine it and they crunch it up and put it in a bag and give it to you. They don't do anything to it. And then as we work up the list, we get into like food grade. Well, food grade is refined. What that means is they've refined that magnesium or that calcium to a point where you could use it in foods. It's pure enough and certified by the government to be pure enough to put into a food product for human consumption. That's more pure than the ungraded stuff. And then when you get up into the pharmaceutical grade, that's then again more pure enough that you could make a human drug out of it, pure enough that you could use it in a hospital. Well, what's all that stuff that we're taking out to make it so pure? All contaminants. silicates and heavy metals and all the stuff that we don't want in the salt. So when you're paying more for a salt that is made with high grade raw materials, what you're paying for is what has been taken out. What you're paying for is what's insured to not be in that box. Now, granted, Tropic Marin salt, all 4 of our salts, contain natural seawater levels of all 70 trace elements found in natural seawater. That's not true of all salts. But that's not what you're paying the money for. What you're really paying the money for is the high grade of raw materials that we use that ensures that when you do your water change, you're not introducing certain contaminants like heavy metals and stuff that you don't want into your system. So why would you buy an expensive coral and then put it in a tank and then buy the cheapest salt that you can to make the water that this coral has to live and breathe in 24/7? Doesn't make any sense. So if I had to pick one product from Tropic Marin in maintaining my reef tank, it would be the salt, because that's something that my corals are living in and breathing and ingesting and dealing with every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for the rest of their lives. Now, I'd love to be able to use some of the other products too, but salt will be number one.
Well, I think that's
a brilliant.
Well,
answer.
yeah,
after-
absolutely.
After that in-depth explanation, I totally changed my opinion on what I was going to say. Anyway, for sure, I'm going to agree with Lou on that one.
So now you got to
Sorry,
say
Steve.
what you're
Yeah.
going to say, Steve, because you can't leave us hanging.
No, I'm not going to say what it was. No, I'm going to agree with Lou.
Lou, how do you quality assure that one bucket that you buy, a couple of months before, is the same quality and grade as one you might buy 2 or 3 months later? Obviously, different batches and things. How closely matched are the batches?
Extremely closely, and as I was talking about our quality control procedures, if you have a question about your salt, and you will, you know why? Because when somebody has a problem in their tank, the first thing they blame is the salt. That's the first thing. I get hundreds of emails, not hundreds, but I get lots of emails where somebody says, you have a bad batch of salt because I have this problem. And it never turns out to be the salt. It's always something else. If you have an issue and we're trying to track down that issue and I have your lot number, I can literally trace back every single raw material that's in your bucket, when we got it, where it came from, what it tested like when we got it in. I also can tell you during manufacturing, we tested this bucket, that bucket, that bucket, and that bucket. And here's what all those parameters were during the filling of the buckets. And then if we still have a question, I can go in and pull our batch sample from your batch and do a test myself.
Wow.
So our quality control procedures and protocols are so tight and so close that we can track down pretty much no matter what the potential problem is. We could track it down. In 22 years of being with this company, I have never seen a dangerous batch of salt. And I think I've seen maybe a couple of batches that one parameter was not where it was supposed to be. It's just not something that happens with our company because we're constantly testing. When we mix a batch of salt, we have specialized mixers. And when we mix a batch of salt, we're testing the beginning, the middle, and the end of that batch to make sure that everything that comes out of that mixer is the same. So there's a lot of quality control protocol that goes into it.
So I suppose, Louis, that would add to the cost as well, wouldn't it? Because one, you're taking out the stuff that shouldn't be there, like metals, and that comes at a cost. And then QA can be costly, can't it? Because you're each batch, different processes and stuff like that. But I suppose quality, there's a cost to quality, isn't there?
Oh, it's like anything
Absolutely.
else. You get what you pay
in
for.
life is like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
You get what you
Yeah.
pay for. That's an overused term, and sometimes that's not always true. To be fair, but that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
If people are watching now, what advice would you give them about changing the salt that they use in their reef tank? Would you advise them to ever change? Because
If they're not using Tropic Marin, they should change.
Yeah. People might want to use it, but they're using something else. How do they go about that if they want to make the transition?
In most cases, I'm not going to say in 100% of the cases, but in most cases where people are doing 10 or 15% water changes every 2 to 4 weeks or something like that, it's super easy. Just start doing your water changes with the new salt. In 99% of the cases, it's that simple. Now, in your case, you're running a nano. Let's say that you were one of these people that routinely does a 90% water change every week. I would talk to you about matching parameters, so.
You'd be laughing about that. The fish will have to lay on the side.
I have a few people here that have these. They're like crocs, like jars that are reef tanks, and they do like a 90% water change every week.
Wow.
So if you're doing more than like a 40 or 50% water change, then yes, you do need to wean into it a little bit. But the way I would say to do that is just for the next few months, do 20% water changes instead of 50% water changes. But for the vast majority of the people, almost everybody that does water changes does 10, 15% every 2 to 4, 5 weeks, something like that. Just do the water changes with the new salt. If you do the numbers, even if the parameters are different, that 10 or 15% water change, like I showed you with the calcium example, make very small differences in the aquarium itself.
Yeah.
And Steve, since we're on water changes, here's my comment for you, okay? Because I just put a presentation together for the Brooklyn Aquarium Society, which is the oldest aquarium. They were the first aquarium society in North America, in the US. So I just did a presentation for them about water changes. And this was my closing statement about the water change. And I'm going to say this to you too. I encourage you to do an experiment. And the experiment is, take a picture of your tank at the time of day that it looks best. Do a water change, and then take another picture of the tank the following day. And here's why. I don't have a reef tank right now. I travel too much. I can't keep a reef. I've got a big cichlid tank. I've got a mangrove tank, but I don't have a reef tank right at the moment. But when I did maintain a reef tank, one thing was 100% true. And that thing was, every single time I did a water change, not most of the time, not 90% of the time, 100% of the time that I did a water change, my animals looked better the next day. Now, I have a theory about why that happens, all right? And my theory is, and this is not based in any science whatsoever, right? But my secret little theory in the back of my head is that the molecules that float around the tank don't stay in exactly the same molecular form forever. And when you do a water change, it's like giving your animals a breath of fresh air. It's like when you've been stuck inside all winter and you go outside for those first day in the spring and the air is crisp and clear and beautiful and it feels so good to take a big breath. That's like what it is when you do a water change with clean water change water for your animals. And in my world, if there's a button that I can push that makes my animals look better every time I push that button, I probably should push it once in a while. I'm not one of these people that says you got to do a water change every week or even every month. But if you do an experiment, if you do a 10% water change and your animals look better the next day, shouldn't you do that every few months?
Well, you know what, Lou? I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna post a video, and I will do a video, and I will definitely do that. But what are we talking as in? Are we talking as in like water volume? Are we talking 10% of the volume, or are we talking 20%? What are we talking?
No, do 10 or 15%, 10 or 15%, whatever you're comfortable with.
Right. You know what? I'll do that, and I will take a photo, and I will take a photo the following day, and we shall see.
Let me know.
Absolutely
Let me
will.
know.
Of course. I certainly will. I will do that, definitely. I've got the salt in there. That's what I'm saying. Oh, that's a question. I've got Tropic Marin Pro salt in there, literally a full bucket of it, but it's over 2 years old. Would that still be okay?
Yeah, it's fine. As long as it's not hardened up together.
Oh no! It's still you can. I've opened the lid on it, and I can and it's still soft.
Yeah,
so
that's
it's
fine.
not it's not frozen or anything. It's not outside in the garden. It's
No,
yeah. But I was just
100%
wondering
fine.
whether it is. Is there a life expectancy of salt? Or
Not
not?
until the dry salt is only not good once it takes on atmospheric humidity and gets hard and lumpy.
Right.
And even then, as long as it still dissolves. So when the salt is what they call hygroscopic, meaning it takes on atmospheric humidity. All salts do. As long as it hasn't taken on humidity to get clumpy, it's absolutely fine. If it did get clumpy or hard, if you can scrape it and still get the salt that you need, if that salt dissolves and you don't see a calcium carbonate precipitate, then it's still fine to use. If the humidity has caused the calcium carbonate to precipitate, then you're better off not using it. Won't hurt anything, but you're better off not using it. But as long as it still dissolves, even if it was hard, it's okay.
Right.
So a follow-on question from Lucid Reef: auto water change versus regular water changes. So lots of small changes every day versus a decent 10 to 20% once a week. What's your view on that, Lou?
He's not going to like my answer. I think both work great. I don't think it matters. I think what I tell new reefers is one of the biggest things that you can do is to set yourself up so it's easy to do water changes. If you're set up so it's easy to do water changes, then you'll do them and your tank will get the benefit from them. If you have a problem in your tank, the first thing you're going to do once you figure out what's going on is probably a water change. If it's easy for you to do that, you can correct the problem easily. I know a lot of people that run, automatic water change systems. They change a gallon a day in a 100-gallon tank or whatever whatever it is. I think that's great. I also think it's great if you don't have the ability to do that, to do a 10 or a 20% water change. I don't think you need to do it once a week. I don't even think you necessarily have to do it once a month. I'm just not a fan of never doing a water change. You want to do it once every 2 months, once every 3 months, that's fine. But I'll tell you something. If you do it once every 3 months, when you see how happy your corals are the day after you do it that third month, you're going to want to do it sooner because there's very little that we can do in our reef tanks that makes our animals visibly happier the next day. And if you find something like that, you should do it once in a while. Maybe not once every week. Once every week is too much work. Who wants to work that hard on their reef tank? Forget that. Do it once a month. That's all, once a month.
And I think that's what it was with me. Really, it was like looking at the balling method of Triton and things like that. Yeah, where you say don't do, and it's basically it's people selling it to you. Oh, how good would it be? You never have to do a water change. You don't have to do this, and people take into that, myself included. I was like, well, That'd be fantastic. Never having to jug 30, 40, 50 litres of water around the house and stuff. That'd be perfect for me. So for me, it was like, and it's the same with testing. If I don't need to, what I want to do with my Reef tank is I want to enjoy my tank. I want to enjoy looking at it. I want to enjoy the animals, the fish, the corals, and as long as they're happy for me, that is all of it. I don't want to test, so I buy a KH keeper. Yeah, I don't want to test all these powders and this, that, so I buy Hannah checkers. This for me, if I can for the ease of use of it, and if I can limit my time in making an effort, as in like doing things for the tank, and just enjoy it, then that's what I do. And it comes to water changes, basically, it's me being lazy and I couldn't really be bothered. And plus, my tank is stable enough, or in my eyes anyway. It's not, you know what I mean. So for me, I've not seen any big issue. I've not got algae. I've not got cyano. So I think, well, I don't really need to do it. You know what I mean? So I think that's where this came from.
Yeah, but you're missing one important point.
Yeah.
Sorry, but here's the important point.
Yeah.
You're not testing when your tank is doing well. You're not testing for when it's doing well. You're not looking for a problem.
No.
What you're doing is you're trying to figure out where is your tank all the time when it's doing well, so that when something goes wrong, I can help you fix it. I have so many people that call me and they say, I've got this problem, XYZ problem. And I say, okay, tell me what your parameters are. And they tell me what their parameters are. And I say, okay, how did your tank look 3 months ago? They say, oh, it looked great 3 months ago. Okay, what were the parameters then? Oh, I don't know. I didn't test it. Well, if you didn't test it when it was doing well, I don't know what the parameters today. Maybe you've got a nitrate level of 45, and maybe your nitrate level was 45 3 months ago when the tank looked great. I don't know. Is your phosphate level of 0.3 today, is that bad and causing you a problem? I don't know. Maybe it was 0.3 3 months ago. You need to do periodic testing so that we know where the tank is when it's running well, so that when there's a problem, we can diagnose it. You know, everybody says, well, I ran into a problem with the tank, so I did an ICP test. I had never done one before. Well, if you'd never done one before, then the current ICP test, when your tank is in a problem, doesn't tell us anything.
No.
Something's got to be way out of whack to be able to know that this is your problem when we have no idea what it was when your tank was running well. You know, I don't like to see people test their tank every week. I don't like to see them do a 10 or a 20% water change every week, because that's too much work. And nobody wants to put that much work in. But a 10 or a 20% water change once a month, maybe once every 2 months. Yeah, that's a good idea.
I must admit though, Lou, I do test my water weekly. Every week I test my water for every parameters. But I'm maybe a little behind on just my water changes. So that's all. You know what I mean? Maybe just a little behind. Yeah. So I'm going to take
when was your last water change, Steve?
About 2 years and 1 month ago. 2 years and 2 months ago. So I'm a little behind on that part, but I'll get onto it. I will do that. I will do a water change. I'll use the salt, and I'll do maybe a 30, 40 litre, because it's a 350. So if I do 35 litres, 40 litres, it's about 12%. So, and then we'll see what it's like, and then I'll take a photo, absolutely, and I'll post them.
Send me an email.
I certainly will do.
Send me an email. I want to know what you find. I want to know if it I'm telling you, I don't ever say anything is 100%. But 99%, your animals are going to look happier the next day.
Hey, I will do, for sure.
Okay, I'm going to move us on. So, Lucid, Reef, you've had a few questions today. So, congratulations. I'm going to send these 2 pots out to you for the Reef Active and the Carbon Calcium KH. If you want to message me on Instagram with your address, I will ping it out. So, just move on to a couple more questions, because in the last 10 minutes or so. So I know Julie's a regular on here, Louis, and I know she's a big fan. She uses a lot of Tropic Marin stuff and got one of the ones who recommended all for Reef for me. So you've got a question there around the Reef powder. Appears to look slightly damp when you open the pot. Is that true? Is it false or?
Yeah, it's 100% true, 100% normal, Julie. And in fact, when we first developed the powder and they sent some samples to me, I called my scientists up and I said, this is not right. People are going to complain because it looks wet. It feels wet. It's almost like a damp sand. It's like no. And we did a lot of testing because I was concerned that it wouldn't stay in the container nicely, being wet like that. Turns out completely normal, keeps forever, no problem whatsoever. It's just it does look wet and lumpy, but that's the way the product is. And also, Julie, you should know that if you've been using the liquid, when you use the liquid is virtually clear, and you'll notice that when you mix the powder up, sometimes the powder looks a little bit yellow or a little bit reddish or brownish. That's completely normal. Don't worry about it. Just different batches have slightly different coloration to them. You don't have to worry about it. The result of mixing the Reef powder with the RODI water is exactly what you get in the bottle of Reef liquid. They are the exact same product.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I hope that answers your question.
I've got to admit. Sorry, a quick question on that Reef. When I had my nano tank, that I did do 10 litre water changes. Just 10 litre. It was only a 50 litre tank, but the lads have seen it and I posted it up on my YouTube as well. And the growth, and all I did was just dose the Reef, and I told you guys about it, didn't I? About dosing it. I didn't do anything, and I've never seen. I can honestly say, that I've never seen such stable parameters. I tested that with the Hannah checkers, on the alkaline air, phosphates, everything, and every solitary week it came back at like 8.5. It just came back 8.4, 8.5 in that range. It never ever fluctuated. Even when the corals grew, it was like I was dosing like 9 mil a day. That was it, and it was just like it was just an incredible solution for sure. And I've always said if I got a nano tank again, which I'm hoping to do in the new year, get something different and get new projects on the go. That's all I'm going to use is just the Aquaforest liquid.
Why not use it in the bigger tank?
Because I always thought it's just going to cost me too much to be running it in that set. I use in my tank another company's, and I'm dosing like 260 mil daily of each component in there. You know what I mean?
Look at the powder. Look at the cost of the powder over there, because with the powder, the new powder version, if you buy the 1,600 gram container, makes 10 liters of Reef, and I think the cost is going to be pretty competitive with what you're currently using.
Really? Right.
Yeah.
You know what? I could look into that.
Yeah, look into it.
Lou, do you have bacteria products, like beneficial bacteria products?
Yeah, there's a product called Nitrabiotic.
Okay.
The carbon dosing products are all products that are food for beneficial bacteria. The Nitrabiotic is actual dormant bacteria. Thank
you. I'm just trying to look into different bacterias and dose little, small amounts of different brands.
Yeah, I personally, oh man, my scientists are going to get after me about this. I personally have my own personal opinion is that once your tank is established for a few months, like after it's 6-8 months old, I think you've got all the bacteria in there you need. You just need to feed the good guys. You've introduced all kinds of bacteria. Every time you put a coral in, you're introducing new bacteria. Every time you put a fish in there, you're introducing new bacteria. When a tank's, a few months old, it's pretty much got all the bacteria that it needs. It's just a matter of making sure you're feeding the good guys. That doesn't help me sell Nitrabiotic for sure. And I think, I
had it in the basket then, Lou, but I've just taken it back out again.
I think there are certain applications for it. One of the really important things is that it has purple bacteria in it, and the purple bacteria is what helps to metabolize. If you've got any areas of anaerobic activity in the tank, any black areas under the sand, that anaerobic bacteria produces hydrogen sulfide, which is extremely toxic. And the purple bacteria helps to metabolize the hydrogen sulfide into sulfur and sulfates, which are much less toxic. So there definitely are applications for the nitrobiotic. It's not one of my favorite products that we make, because I'm just a firm believer that there's plenty of bacteria in the tank. You just need to feed the good guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good question. Got a question there. What happened to the All for Reef calculator online?
Oh, sorry about that, guys. When we just put up our new website recently, and there is a glitch with the program that we used for the calculator coming onto the new site. We're working on it. It's just a programming thing. If you have any questions about calculations on any of the products, just email them to the office and we will get back to you. And at some point very soon, we will be able to reinstate the calculators. But those calculators, it was just a conflict of software. And we haven't solved the issue yet. We're close, but we haven't solved the issue yet. I love our new website. I love the way it looks. I love the way it works. But we're getting a lot of complaints that the calculator's gone. And we're working on it, and I promise it's going to be up again soon. We just have to work through the programming issue.
Okay, thank you for that. So a couple more freebies to give out. So Scotland chick, even you've been putting quite a few questions here with answers, so I'm going to send you that out. So again, if you can message me on Instagram, please. And then the last one is Steve Mann. I know you've been kind of heavy in the chat today, a couple of questions answered. I'm going to send you a bottle of 250 ml All for Reef. I haven't got that in front of me. So thank you. So we've got another 4 minutes. Any more questions from anyone in the chat? I think without apologies if I've missed any questions. If you want to put up, if you've got any quick questions, then please put them on screen and I'll see if we can answer them. I don't know, Ross or Steve or
I've got
anyone?
one that I wanted to run
Ross?
past you, Lou, if possible. Now, it's not something that I've really known much about, but there was a bit of debate when I first moved. So I started getting my salt water from my LFS and quickly decided I was going to make my own. So I got the Tropic Marin. But a lot of people at the time told me there was something to do with a sticker added to the salt container to say something about phosphate levels or added phosphate or something. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I don't know if we can have enough time. I'll try to cover it in 3 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry.
So up until very recently, our packaging had a saying on it that said no phosphates, no nitrates, no phosphates, and people were testing phosphate levels in the salt, and it is true that there are low levels of phosphates in the salt, natural seawater levels of phosphate in most salt mixes, ours included.
Yeah.
And the reason those statements were there is because way back in the day, in the 60s, when man-made sea salt first started, the type of calcium that was used tended to precipitate very quickly. And so back in those days, they actually added phosphates to the salt to keep the calcium from precipitating. Well, as time progressed, people were trying to do these low nutrient and ultra low nutrient systems. And so they didn't want phosphates in the salt. And so salts stopped adding phosphates because the type of calcium that we now use and have been using for a million years doesn't need that anymore. And so what those messages meant to say back in those days was no added phosphates and no added nitrates. The simple fact of the matter is that sodium chloride, no matter where it exists on the earth, comes from the ocean. And the ocean has natural seawater level of phosphate in it. So no matter how refined sodium chloride is, it may contain natural seawater levels of phosphate anywhere from 0.03 up to about 0.1. And so since mined. This is why I don't like dried seawater called natural and mined called unnatural. They both come from the same place. If you're getting sodium chloride from a mine, that mine used to be under a primordial sea one day, and now it's dried up, but it comes from the ocean. And that sodium chloride, when you refine it, still could have natural seawater levels of phosphates in it. And we, I believe, are the first salt company in the world to remove the no phosphate, no nitrate labeling on the package and changing it to no added phosphates and no added nitrates. But the important thing to know about that in closing on this, and I know we don't have any time, is that if your sea salt that you're doing your water change with has a natural seawater level of phosphate in it of, say, 0.05, that is not responsible for your 0.2 phosphate level in your tank. You could do 100% water change and it wouldn't raise your phosphate level above the 0.05. And since we need those phosphates in our reef tank, it's actually beneficial to have a small amount of phosphate in that water change water so that you're fostering that level of phosphate in your tank between 0.03 and 0.1.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you very much for that, mate.
Thank you.
Well,
there was a huge brouhaha about this because we were the first salt company to say, yes, there could be a low level of phosphate in your salt. Here's why it's there. And we're going to change our labeling. I think we're the first company to do that.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. We're out of time, but I'm going to give one more minute to this question. Can we expect any new products from Tropic Marin coming soon? So sorry, Julie, I know we're over time, but I'll let Louis answer this and then we'll close out.
We just released 5 products, 5 new products this year. We do have new products in research. And I'll tell you, I'm not going to tell you what they are or what they do, but I'll tell you that along with some of our new products are also going to come some really cool new concepts in aquarium keeping, things that are not really being talked about a lot right now. And I'm actually encouraging Hans-Werner Balling and Eckhard Hebelin and our team in Germany to publish some papers kind of backing up some of the research that they've done on these new products. I'm really excited about a couple of them. They're not going to be coming out tomorrow because we did just release 5 new ones. But we do have a number of new things in the works. And I think you'll see new products from Tropic Marin certainly in 2022 at some point.
Wow.
Brilliant.
Can't wait.
Great answer.
Sounds exciting.
Right. As Julie says, time is up and a great stream. So thank you to the usual suspects in the comments, some new people as well online. So thank you very much for tuning in. The biggest thanks to Louis for taking time 2 hours of his day to come and all I'd say is educate us, because it's been absolutely superb. And I think the comments reflect that in terms of people watching it back, tons to learn, lots to pick up. Thank you very much. So,
and I've learned that I need to start doing water changes more than once every 2 years. So that's what I'm going to do.
I want that email. I want to know what happens when you do it.
I absolutely will do, for sure, definitely, 100%.
Right. On that note, thank you all. Thank you all for joining. Have a great weekend and happy reefing.
Have a good one. Thanks very much,
Cheers, guys.
Have a lovely weekend.